Sorry about the delay there. Welcome to those in the auditorium, and welcome to those that are joining us by way of live streaming. First of all, I want to say thank you to Ned for taking care of the class last week. I tuned in from Georgia. Ned had a great class last week, and I missed the last part of it, Ned, because worship started at Buford at 10 o'clock, and so we missed out part of your class, but thank you for taking care of the class last week. Our study this morning is in the 51st chapter of Jeremiah, beginning with the 18th verse. That's where we left off last week. Chapters 50 and 51 of Jeremiah deal with the destruction of Babylon. Now, it's interesting that there's so much Old Testament prophecy that relates to Babylon. Of course, Babylon is a city, an idea, I guess. It's more so an idea that's in the book of Revelation as being a bad actor. But Babylon must have been especially a bad society. Isaiah references the destruction of Babylon in several chapters, and of course Jeremiah speaks to the destruction of Babylon. Babylon was, I guess, in terms of the old world, that ancient world, Babylon was rich, it was arrogant, it was, I guess, probably the envy of various nations around about. It was a fighting machine. Babylon was, they considered themselves invincible because of the tremendously high wall of maybe 300 feet. Someone has, and ancient historians have indicated that it took 200,000 workers a year to construct that wall around Babylon. Not only was that a defense for them, but they had a moat that was about 300 feet around the wall, 300 feet wide, filled with water. They had the river Euphrates ran through the city, so they had plenty of access to water. They had plenty of, someone has estimated that they had 20 years supply of food and other necessities in the city. And so they were, they didn't have to worry about any foreign power taking over. Well, prophecy 150 years before that period of time, prophecy indicated that they were going to have a problem. If we go back to the Isaiah, the 21st chapter, and it says here, now this is 150 years before that period of time. The prophet says in verse 9, "And behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. O my thrashing, and the corn of my floor, that which I have heard of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, have I declared to you." So here's a city that archaeologists have found had some sayings on the wall. One of their chief gods was Bel, B-E-L, English translation, and the label there was something to the effect of the residence of Bel, the home of Bel. and Baal protects. So these people must have been gross idolaters, because they're 150 years before the fall of Babylon. Isaiah was prophesying with regard to that whole thing. Well, Isaiah 45 speaks to Babylon. Remember, this is prophecy that was more than a century before the fall of Babylon. But in the 45th chapter of Isaiah, the Lord says, "Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus," century and a half before the fall of Babylon. Cyrus is mentioned, and of course Cyrus was the Persian king, the Persian military strategist. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. Now, previous to that, in the 44th chapter, he said in the 27th verse there, "That saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers." Now, that's pretty specific. Euphrates running through Babylon, that moat around Babylon with water in it. They had, that protection, supply line, river supply line for the folks there. And in verse 28 of the 44th chapter says, "Thus saith of Cyrus," again mentioning Cyrus, "He is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure." God had determined that at a later point in history, Babylon was going to be destroyed, and here the key here is this idolatry. "He's my shepherd," of Cyrus, the Persian. "He's my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundations shall be laid." There, putting Israel in the context of that historical matter. Then going back to the 45th chapter, let me repeat that verse 1 again. "Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him." Now we know there were a lot of nations that connected with the Medo-Persian Empire when Babylon was attacked. There were other nations that no doubt Cyrus had give them the option of joining his military efforts, or he would fight them, and so there was a whole herd of nations involved in this. "And I will loose the loins of the kings." Loose the loins of the kings. Notice that. They're going to be, this Cyrus is going to be having companions, military allies, open before him. "And the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee, and make crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass." Now, historians indicate that those brass, they had a total of 15 gates on each side, 45 then all together, and they were brass. Now think of that. That sort of prophecy, more than a century before. "And I will give thee treasures of darkness, and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by my name, am the God of Israel," and so on. Well then, in the 47th chapter of Isaiah, we have additional information, and beginning with Well, let's just start at 47 in the first verse of chapter 47 of Isaiah. Remember, this is a long time before, a long time before this actually played out on the pages of history. 47 of Isaiah, verse 1. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. That idea of a virgin daughter, that they hadn't been attacked, they hadn't been spoiled. O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne. Remember when Daniel interpreted the handwriting on the wall, the king of Babylon quaked and was, Scripture indicates, killed relatively soon after that. O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. They were going to be something else. Take the millstones and the grind meal, uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, pass over the rivers. All of that having to do with the downfall of Babylon. Now, returning then to the 51st chapter, the 18th verse, where we will start today. Jeremiah 51, verse 18. Now, in the middle of this, we're right in the middle of a passage of Scripture here that identifies the sovereignty of God, His awesomeness, in this same language here, starting in verse 15 of Jeremiah 51, going back from verse 18 here. This same language about the sovereignty of God is in Jeremiah chapter 10, 12 to 16. So that basically the same language here is repeated. Now why, I don't know, but it is repeated. And so I'll go back and to verse 15, leading up to where we start this morning. He hath made the earth by his power, speaking of God. Now, contrasting that with the idols, what could they make? Squat, nothing. And of course, Babylon was steeped in idolatry. So he hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom, and has stretched out the heaven by his understanding. When he uttereth his voice, there is a multitude of waters. Remember when God came down to Mount Sinai, when the children of Israel were in the wilderness and viewing that scene, his voice was so awesome that the people appealed to Moses, said, you talk to God. We're not in a position to do so. Verse 16, when he uttered his voice, there's a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh the lightnings with rain, and bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures, talking about the water cycle, evaporation into the atmosphere, and the rain, the lightnings, and the wind out of his treasures. Now every man, he contrasts this with every man and man's devices, making idols and so forth. Every man is brutish by his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. There, man making graven images in ignorance. For his molten image is falsehood, and there's no breath in them. They are vanity, the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish. Now, in the context of the description of the destruction of Babylon, this thing of idols comes up over and over again. They are vanity, the work of errors, that is the work of delusion. In the time of their visitation, they shall perish. And of course, the gods of Babylon perished with that culture, with that massive city, with that civilization. Verse 19, now he brings in Jacob, the Israelites. The portion of Jacob is not like them. Now, Jacob, the Israelites were turned bad. But God says the portion of Jacob is not like them. No, they're not like the Babylonians. And of course, God had a vested interest there in the children of Israel. For he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. That is, Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. Israel is a culture, is a civilization, is a nation, a body of people, a body politic, we might say. Israel is the rod, the tribe of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. Now, in verse 20, then he comes back to the after this insertion of how awesome God is in the text. He comes back to this notion this destruction scene. Now, he says in verse 20, "Thou art my battle axe and weapons of war. For with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee I will destroy kingdoms." Now, the question there is he talking about the Persian people coming in to destroy Babylon, or is he talking about the Babylonians? And there are various views on that. Some say one thing and some say another among the scholars of the Bible. It would seem that if you jump down a few verses to 24, he invokes Zion. All the evil that they have done in Zion. So this must reference how Babylon was involved here, and in this language attributed to the Babylonians. Verse 23 says, "I will also break in pieces with thee the shepherd and the flock," and of course Babylon did that sort of thing. They assaulted nations, destroyed nations, including Jerusalem. "I will break also in pieces with thee the shepherd and his flock, and with thee will I break in pieces the husbandman and his yoke of oxen," that is the farmer and his domestic livestock, "and with thee will I break in pieces captains and rulers." Now, with thee, you're my hammer. They were his tools. This nation was his tool of punishment for those other nations. "And I will render into Babylon and to all the inhabitants of Chaldea, and all their evil that they have done in Zion." And it was Babylon, of course, that destroyed Jerusalem, the hill of Zion being included in Jerusalem. "In Zion, in your sight, saith the Lord. Now behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain." Now that city of Babylon, with that massive wall around it, was kind of like a mountain. "Behold, I am against thee." He's talking there think, well, specifically about Babylon. Behold, I'm against thee, O destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyeth all the earth. Babylon was the head of nations. It was it was the as we might say today, it was the in the world. It was the top nation. It was the most powerful nation. People ought to be careful about talking about powerful nations because, how long did it take to destroy the Soviet Union? After Reagan made that special speech about Mr. Gorbachev, was it Gorbachev? Tear the wall down. Think about how nations have rose up and fallen. Well, behold, I'm against thee, O destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyeth all the earth. That is, the nations. He assaulted many of those nations, and the biblical script, the biblical notion here is that all the earth, broadly speaking. And I will stretch out mine hand upon thee, and roll thee down from the rocks, and will make thee a burnt mountain. Make a volcano out of you. That big city. And they shall not take of thee a stone for a corner. Isn't going to be enough left of Babylon to find a cornerstone for another nation or another building, you see. Nor a stone for foundations, but thou shalt be desolate forever, saith the Lord. Now it took several ensuing, kingdoms to really accomplish the complete destruction that we can see in Iraq. Alexander the Great, after the Persian regime, Alexander the Great decided to set up headquarters in Babylon. But what happened? And he according to history, he was involved in a project to try to rebuild the walls. But what happened to Alexander the Great? At the young age of less than 40, lower 30s, what happened to him? He died. He was gone. So, do you suppose if all the nations of the earth would decide today, we're going to go in and rebuild Babylon? You think it'd happen? You think it'd happen? It's not going to happen. Thou shalt not take thee a corner or a stone for a corner, nor a stone for foundation, but thou shalt be desolate forever, saith the Lord. Set ye up a standard in the land. Now, here again, the question is, to whom is he speaking here? He's speaking about the Cyrus coming in as Isaiah had predicted and prophesied. He says he probably is talking about the Persians now. Verse 27, set ye up a standard in the land. That is a battle flag. Set ye up a battle flag, a standard in the land. Blow the trumpet. That has to do with military action of that day. Set up and blow the trumpet among the nations. Prepare the nations against her. Call together against her the kingdoms of Erat, Minai, Ashchenaz. Appoint a captain against her. Cause the horses to come up as the rough caterpillars. That rough caterpillars. What's that about? Remember the plagues of Egypt and the plagues of that area of the world? And there are still those kind of, problems with, the grasshopper type insects in that area of the world. But there's going to be a lot. He's identifying it's going to be a lot of military people. He says, cause the horses to come up as caterpillars. Now, in verse 27, who do you suppose this captain's going to be? Well, he was specifically named by Isaiah more than a century before that. So I think that's pretty clear. Verse 28, prepare against her the nations with the king of the Medes. Well, there we got it. There we have it. Medo-Persian group. The Persians and the Medes got together. I think they were first enemies, but they came together to form a new body politic, a new nation. Prepare against her the nations with the kings of Medes. Let's see. Cyrus was a Persian. Darius was a Mede. So there was some kind of shared. I don't know how they operated, but there's some kind of shared leadership there between the Mede group and the Persians. Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And the land shall tremble in sorrow. For every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon. Now there's the key. Every purpose of the Lord. 150 years before that it was prophesied Babylon was going to fall. Remember Isaiah said about Babylon falling, as though it was happening. But that in prophecy, when that present tense is used, you can take it to the bank. It'll happen. So they just say, it's fallen now. Okay. The land shall tremble and sorrow, and every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon, and make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. Nobody's even going to be a squatter there. It's going to be left to the wildlife. In verse 30, the mighty men of Babylon have forborne to fight. This tremendous army of the Babylonians, they're for whatever reason, they're not going to fight too much. They're not going to be, according to this, they're forborne to fight. They have remained in their holds. Some historians have indicated that in the neighborhoods that people didn't really realize that the Medo-Persian group had taken over for a while. Their might have failed. They became as a woman. The thought there is that the woman's the weaker of the two, that kind of thing. And they have burned her dwelling places and her bars. That is, their locks are broken. Locks are broken. Apparently there were locks and then of course bridges. Since the Euphrates ran through that city, there were locks and bridges and so forth. And then he's giving a description of what's going to happen here. One post or one messenger shall run to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, to show the king of Babylon that his city is taken at one end, or is taken at every end, and that the passages are stopped. The passages are stopped. That's are seized. They're probably their routes from the river to the city proper. And the reeds they have burned with fire, and the men of war are affrighted. Now, how these these reeds are in the river, right? How are they going to be burned? Well, in a stroke of genius, but probably by the providence of God, Cyrus diverted the river, and things dried up to the point that the reeds could be burned up. You see, the plant life in the river could be burned up. And the men were affrighted. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor. That daughter of Babylon just refers to Babylon. They're like a threshing floor. Anyone ever seen a threshing floor? I've seen one in a distance in another country. Flat area, packed down. Animals used to just knock out the grain. They're going to be just trampled just like a threshing floor, beat into the ground. It is time to thresh her. This 150-year previous prophecy has come to the point. It's time to thresh her. Yet a little while, and the time for harvest shall come. Not too long from the time that Jeremiah spoke this until it was going to be taking place. Now Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. How in the world would God say that he had been devoured by Nebuchadnezzar? He allowed it. He allowed that to happen. That is, and it was Jerusalem. It was the temple that he's referencing here. He hath crushed me. He hath made me empty, an empty vessel. An empty vessel. Nothing in it. Just destroyed. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicacies. He hath cast me out. It's just as if the Nebuchadnezzar come in, filled his, the idea here is filled his belly with all the good things and spit out what he didn't want. In verse 35, the violence done to me and to my flesh be upon Babylon. There's a connection here between the destruction of Babylon and what Nebuchadnezzar did to God's station there in Jerusalem. The violence done to me and to my flesh be upon Babylon. Babylon is now going to be held accountable. Shall the inhabitant of Zion say, my blood upon the inhabitants of Chaldea? Shall Jerusalem say? Well, the Jews would probably understand that, well, they're getting what they, whatsoever they sowed, they're reaping it. Therefore, in verse 36, therefore thus saith the Lord, behold, I will plead my cause and take vengeance for thee. I will dry up her sea and make her springs dry. Now, doesn't that sound like that the canals going off of the river Euphrates, which they had to water the crops, the moat they had around the city walls, talking about drying up her sea, her waters, make her springs dry. Now, it's kind of interesting to me. Who would have ever thought about diverting the river? Well, out of the providence of God, it's by His providence that they had that. The enemy of Babylon had that in mind, or came to that conclusion. And Babylon shall become heaps, a dwelling place for dragons, and an astonishment, and hissing without inhabitant. So, here's this magnificent city, this empire, the leader of the world, ends up being a pile of rubble. That is, their infrastructure became a pile of rubble. Now they shall roar together, in verse 38, they shall roar together like lions, and shall yell as lions whelps. Now, whether this refers to the Babylonians as a result of the assault, or whether it refers to the Persians, in their battle cry, so to speak, I guess it's anybody's guess. But the result is the same. Babylon is going to be destroyed. And in their heat, I will make their feasts. Now that language, in their heat, has to do with drinking. Has to do with, you remember when, according to 5th chapter of Daniel, you'll remember that they had kind of a drunken deal. They were all assembled under the leadership of Belshazzar, the king at the time that the Babylonians were destroyed. They were having a big deal, and he's saying here in their heat, in their drunkenness, I will make their feast, and I will make them drunken, that they may rejoice and sleep in a perpetual sleep. Now, they weren't going to sleep off this one. It's going to be a perpetual sleep, and not wake, saith the Lord. Perpetual there. Verse 40, and I will make them down like, I will bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams with he-goats. This is going to be kind of a sacrifice scene. This is alluding to they're going to be sacrificed, this nation of people. How is Shishak taken? Now that Shishak is a code word or name for Babylon. How is Shishak taken? And how is the praise of the whole earth surprised? How has Babylon become an astonishment among the nations? In other words, here, the destruction of Babylon is going to be a surprise to the people around about. Right? We had an incident in America just a while back that surprised the nations. Did we not? Surprised the whole world. How could such a thing happen with the nation that has championed peaceful transition, democracy? How could this happen? The fall of Babylon was an astonishment among the nations. And he uses a metaphor. The sea has come up upon Babylon. She is covered with the multitude of the waves. It's as if the flood, the waves of the ocean just overcame them, destroyed them. It's a quick. It was something quickly. The handwriting on the wall. You're weighing the balances and found wanting, and then boom. The kingdom ended. Verse 43, our cities are a desolation, a dry land, a wilderness, a land wherein no man dwelleth, neither doth any son of man pass thereby. This is just repetitious of what Jeremiah's been saying. Now why would, when there were so many things that could have been reported here, why would God keep reminding the world, not only the nation, not only the ancient world, but the world to come, the succeeding generation? Why would he keep, repeating this? Why didn't he give us some other information? Why didn't he just say this once and then go on to something else? Well, apparently the lesson is pretty important, and so it's kind of repeats and repeats. And I will punish Bel. Now, I mentioned earlier, archaeologists have found indication that the sayings on the wall of Babylon had that Babylon protects, or that Bel protects. Well, Bel isn't going to protect, didn't protect, never will protect. I will punish Bel in Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he hath swallowed up, and the nations shall not flow together any more unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. People no doubt migrated to that great city of Babylon, right? No more. They're going to get out of that city. We'll find here the prophet warned them to get out. Verse 46, and lest your heart faint, and ye fear for the rumor that shall be heard in the land, a rumor shall both come 1 year, and after that in another year shall come a rumor, and violence in the land, ruler against ruler. Apparently, there's going to be some time period where there's a warning, and then it's over. Therefore, verse 47, behold, the days come that I will do judgment upon the graven images. Notice this again. The punishment was to be administered because they rejected God. Is that right? They rejected God and got involved in materialism, all kinds of debauchery, and that was associated with idolatry. And I will do judgment upon the graven images of Babylon, and her whole land shall be confounded, and all of her slain shall fall in the midst of her. Then the heaven and the earth, and all that is therein, shall sing for Babylon. For the spoilers shall come unto her from the north, saith the Lord. I don't know what that whole idea of singing for Babylon is. But it may have reference to, there's not much sympathy in the end, there was not much sympathy for Babylon. Was there much sympathy for the Soviet Union when it fell in the world community? I don't think so. Well, there's that thing. Yes. Okay. What we could have to do with the song of victory. Yeah. And for whatever reason, the nations that were catering to Babylon were now just singing because they were just glad that this powerful nation fell. As Babylon hath caused the slain of Israel to fall, so at Babylon shall fall the slain of all the earth. Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. Now, Babylon is going to be destroyed. Verse 50, ye that have escaped the sword, go away. Stand not still. Remember the Lord afar, and let Jerusalem come into your mind. Probably talking about the Jewish people, and maybe some of the proselytes of the Jewish community. I suppose there would have been some proselytes. You have escaped the sword, go away. Stand not still. Remember the Lord afar, and let Jerusalem come into your minds. Think Jerusalem. You Jews of Babylon. Think about returning to Jerusalem. And some of the people that were carried away into captivity, according to Ezra and Nehemiah's books, some of those endured that whole captivity and came back to Jerusalem. We have, verse 51, we are confounded because we have heard reproach. Shame hath covered our faces, for strangers are come into the sanctuaries of the Lord's house. Strangers have come into the sanctuary of the Lord's house. What did Nebuchadnezzar's forces do with the temple? Went into the temple, confiscated, gathered up the furniture, so to speak, and I didn't hear a bell, but I think we're out of time. So we'll begin next week at verse 51, Isaiah 51.